Hello and welcome to
Wednesday's Night Out.
with your host Joseph, Turnpike Plaza 365 Rec Squad. We will be reading quotes that will change your life, edited by Russ Kick. Reality, truth, and such things. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness. Wilts all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens. There lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch, they are there in all their completeness. They forbid a premature closing of our accounts with reality. William James. The Dive from Clausen's Pier by Ann Packard. Part 2, 1,000 Miles. Chapter 15. Simon lived on the edge of Chelsea in a decrepit old brownstone with taped over windows and a sheet of graffitied plywood covering the front door. The house was owned by a partner at his law firm. The partner had inherited it from an uncle and was renting it to Simon for the unheard of sum of $500 a month, while he tried to decide whether to unload it or sink a bundle into it and live there himself. A block east, everything was leafy and well kept. Neat iron fence slits around the bases of ginkgo trees. But this block was borderline home not just to some other dubious townhouses, but also to a gas station, an auto body shop, and a double-wide empty lot surrounded by chain-link fence. Simon and some Yale friends occupied the 4 bedrooms, but he found me an empty alcove on the 3rd floor, and together we dragged a spare futon up the steep, creaking stairs. He kept apologizing about the place, but I liked it. It was so shabby and easygoing. Water stains mapped the ceilings, bits of baseboard pulled away from the walls. The walls themselves looked so battered they might have been attacked, scarred with marks and dents and actual holes that blew plaster dust onto the floors. In the bathrooms, leaky faucets wobbled in their sockets, while ancient bathtubs rested on clawed feet. Makeshift shower curtains hanging precariously from rigged up lengths of pipe. Like showering in a raincoat, Simon said. And it was true. There was a dark, cavernous living room, but the kitchen was the true center of the house. The place where everyone hung out, low ceilinged and poorly lit. It was full of old appliances, a broken washing machine, a broken dishwasher, a rickety electric range with a broken fan, an enormous dinosaur of a microwave, a freestanding lift top freezer that served as a countertop, and a round shouldered refrigerator that gave off an erratic, worrisome hum. On an old metal desk that had been shoved against the wall, there was a big whiteboard that Simon told me was the most important piece of furniture in the house, the place where messages were recorded. At least a couple stereos were usually playing, and it was a little like living in a dorm again. People coming and going at all hours. The sound of a door closing, waking me just as I'd fallen asleep. Simon's friends were perfectly nice, but they were all so ambitious. I felt like a misfit. Simon was a proofreader, but wanted to be an illustrator. One friend was a waiter, but wanted to be an actor. Another worked at the magazine, but wanted to be a playwright. Simon referred to what they were doing now as their meanwhile jobs, as if once they'd held them for a while, they'd step past them into their lives. My ambition was to have an ambition until I found Kilroy. Then I did, to stay in New York. I left his note in Madison, but I'd brought our conversation. And the intent way he'd looked at me across Victor and Anaya's table, and the name of the bar where he hung out, the place with the pool table that had a gauge he could almost always make work for him. McClanahan's. A few days after my arrival, I sat at the kitchen table with the Manhattan white pages and looked up the address. It was on Avenue of the Americas, 6th Avenue, which, according to my map, narrowed it down to about 60 blocks. Nonetheless, I headed off to look. Still such a newcomer that the traffic unnerved me. The groaning buses, the scream of an ambulance, the flash and honk of a dozen taxis. The density of people on the streets amazed me, the density and the variety. I'd always thought Madison was pretty multicultural, but it was clear now how white it really was. I saw faces from olive to deep brown, heard accents I didn't recognize, languages I couldn't begin to identify. I passed restaurants, pharmacies, laundromats, stationers, florists, liquor stores, coffee shops, and then suddenly there it was, McClanahan, a corner bar next to a dry cleaner's. What did it mean that I'd done this, tracked this place down? I hurried by, telling myself a story I half believed, that I was just exploring the city and could as easily have been somewhere else. I was back the next day. There were neon beer signs in the windows, Miller and Pabst, good Midwestern beers. But here the windows were covered by iron bars. I went around the block slowly, wondering what I'd do when I got back. The stretch from 7th to 6th seemed endless and dark, narrow passageway of tall gray buildings. Finally, I reached McClanahan's again, and someone opened the door just as I arrived, revealing a long, narrow room that was smoke filled and dimly lit and nearly empty. On the third day, I planted myself out front. People looked at me as they strolled by, or didn't. Already I understood how the rules of the sidewalk differed from the rules in Madison or even Chicago. Here you could do anything you wanted, growl, rant, scream, and no one would give you more than a passing glance. The door to McClanahan's was massive, ornamented with tarnished brass studs. I stood there, waiting for something to take over, the urge to leave or the urge to go in. 5 minutes went by, perhaps 10. I didn't keep track. I stared at the door until virtually conjured Kilroy himself came out. He looked older than I remembered, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, his face narrow and closed. His hair was shaggy, and he sported a 2 or 3 day growth of beard. He glanced at me and turned the corner, then stopped and turned back. "I know you," he said, and I smiled a little, feeling foolish and pleased and scared. He pointed at me. "Madison, Wisconsin. Dinner at that Polish couple's house. How's it going?" "Fine. How are you?" "I'm fine, Carrie." I couldn't believe he remembered my name after what? 3 months, but he just gave me a sly smile and went on. "No, don't tell me I'm going for broke here, Carrie." "Belle." "There, I got it. Do you remember my name?" I told him what it was, and he smiled again. This time a sweet, open mouth smile that revealed his front teeth, the way one overlapped the edge of the other. He said, "You're a long way from home, Carrie Bell. What brings you to wretched New York?" "Why is it wretched?" "Oh, you know, it's wretched. It's wonderful. It's disgusting. It's divine. All at the same time. Usually, which is why I love it so." He gave me an ironic look, as if to suggest that in fact, he didn't love it so, or that if he did, it was for something simple, nothing he'd be so glib about. He gestured at me with his chin. But you haven't answered my question. Carrie Bell, the evasive. What's a nice Midwestern girl like you doing in big bad Manhattan? What makes you so sure I'm nice? You've got it written all over you. It's right there on your face next to sweet and good. I thought of what I'd done. Run out in the middle of the night on people who counted on me. And I felt shaky suddenly, ready to cry. I hadn't called anyone in Madison. Had no idea what was going through my mother's head. Jamie, Mike's. Oops, he said. I sense a story. Can I buy you a beer? Or do you want to pretend this never happened? We never ran into each other. I looked at the door to McClanahan's. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, and I wondered how long he'd been in there. There were 3 or 4 tiny blonde hairs growing out of his cheek, up near his left eye, and I longed to reach up and stroke them. Sure, I said to him. I'll have a beer. That first day we talked for 4 hours, or rather I talked. I told him all about the summer, the jerky slide of my feelings, the weeks and weeks of it, and how since leaving I'd been on a speedway, careening from guilt to remorse to relief to exhilaration, with New York standing right outside it all, massive, impassive, just there and there. I even told him about the last night with Mike, his "we've had it, haven't we?" and the way I waved to him from the door as I was leaving, a finger wiggle, a light, entirely untruthful wiggle of the fingers of my right hand, as if either of us had any idea what we expected next, let alone what would actually happen. You flew the coop, Kilroy said. You had to? We were sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park by then, the night black and heavy around us, a pair of pigeons bobbing at our feet. We'd stayed at McClanahan's until it had gotten so crowded we couldn't hear each other. Then we'd eaten pizza slices standing in at the corner of a place open to the den of 8th Street. I think it was brave of you, he went on. It must have been a very hard thing to do. He turned so he was facing me, one knee up on the bench, harder than staying. Staying felt impossible. Yeah, but staying was static. You acted. I admire it. I was surprised, and for the first time since we'd begun talking, I felt self-conscious in the bar, with voices rushing past us. It had been easier. The park was bright with activity. A gang of kids on skateboards, a knot of teenagers around a tiny amber, a tall man swooping by on rollerblades. But it was all far away. Modulated, no competition for the sudden strangeness that overcame me. Kilroy grinned. You can't believe you're talking to me like this when you don't really know me. I don't really know you, I said with a laugh. I don't know you at all. He lifted one shoulder. What's knowing someone? You may not know where I grew up or what I do from 9 to 5 every day, but you know what it's like to be with me for several hours. Doesn't that tell you more than information would? I guess, I said, but I was thinking, where did you grow up? Where do you what do you do from 9 to 5 each day? Drink? He looked at me and laughed. Go ahead. Okay, easy one first, I said. Is Kilroy your first name or last name? It's neither. It's your middle name? My name is Paul Elliott Frazier. There's no Kilroy in there at all. It's just what I'm called. Why? Because it's not in there at all. Score one, Kilroy, I thought. All right, where did you grow up? Smirking, he lifted a finger to his lips. I didn't. Don't tell. Paul Elliott Frazier, the evasive, I said, and he gave me a big smile that lasted and lasted, a smile that anointed me. New York, he said, born and bred, and the thing I do from 9 to 5 is I work for a temp agency. I get hired out to businesses who need a week or two of word processing done because someone's on vacation, or I go answer the phones while someone's sick. I'm the rambling man of office work. I never stay anywhere very long. I put that dictaphone behind me and saddle up for the subway ride to the copier on the horizon. I smiled, but I was surprised. I'd figured he was a struggling something or other, like Simon and his friends. Maybe he was a struggling something or other and just wasn't saying. Happy now? He said. Feel you know me a whole lot better? I lifted one shoulder. Do your parents still live in the city? If you could call it that. What? They live in one of the other boroughs or something? Living, he said. Something in his expression warned me not to ask more. He took his keys from his pocket and began fiddling with them, pulling them around the key ring one by one. Uncomfortable, I looked away at the teenagers behind us. They seemed so veiled, their faces by their hair, their bodies by their dark, shapeless clothes. A bit of light glinting A bit of light glinted off a nylon jacket, but otherwise they were barely more than silhouettes. I turned back and found Kilroy studying me. "Are you an alcoholic?" I asked, no idea where I'd gotten the nerve. "What gives you that idea?" You were at the bar in the middle of the afternoon." "I'm just a guy who likes bars," he said. "And McClanahan's is about as good as it gets these days. Though the yuppie hordes are making inroads." He smiled. "Next time we'll have your first lesson." "My first lesson?" "Your first pool lesson. I'm sure I remember that you've never shot pool." "You have quite a memory." "I've heard that said before." "By whom?" By whom, I wondered, but he was getting to his feet. So I stood too, and all at once everyone stood with me. Mike, Jamie, Rooster, even my brother, everyone I had been talking about. Why did I have such a crowd along when Kilroy was so obviously by himself? "Shall we?" he said. We'd entered the park through an opening on the side, but we went out past the arch, at once massive and curiously ghostly against the night sky. It was my first time on Lower Fifth Avenue, and I walked with my head tilted back, the skyline jagged with roofs and lit windows. Far ahead, the Empire State Building was limned with white lights. "Do you like to talk?" he said. I nodded. "That's good. New York is a walker's city. That's the only way to get to know it." We turned onto 14th Street and went past gated storefronts and tiny bodgas crowded with men. Cold fluorescent light spilled onto the sidewalk. In Madison, there would have been a stillness to the night, but here even the garbage in the gutters seemed active, jittering in the wind, ready to dart away. A police car with its red and blue lights swirling shrieked past us and turned at the far corner. "I love sirens," Kilroy said. "The sound of them, especially at night." I looked at him. "I do. My bedroom's an especially good listening point for sirens. It's got my only window onto 7th Avenue. You'll see." I stopped walking, and he stopped too, and smiled at me. "I'll see," I said. "I'll see your bedroom?" He shook his head gravely. "Don't be offended by the truth, Carrie. That's an untenable position, don't you think?" It was, and it was only a week later that I saw his bedroom. A week later that I stood beside his bed while he unbuttoned the row of tiny buttons down the front of my sweater. Methodically, not a touch through the lengthening openings until the whole was undone. But first we walked through the teeming East Village, up and down the wide traffic-clogged avenues, along the grimy, redolent streets of Chinatown. I couldn't get enough of it, of the crowds, the purposefulness. In Midtown, I stared upward and felt awed, filled with vertigo by the clouds rushing between the skyscrapers. The steps into the subway fascinated me, and I asked Kilroy to stop at station after station while I looked down, simultaneously appalled and intrigued by the stench. Goalie, he said, we don't have these in Wisconsin. But he said it kindly, and I just laughed. He was a good guy. He pointed out junkies and prostitutes, stockbrokers, and undercover cops as if they wore uniforms, as if they held aloft signs only he could see. A good guide, but also opinionated. Passing restaurants I thought looked interesting, he said, this is where the hipsters hang out. This is where the media people eat. Nowhere he'd go was the implication. We ate in coffee shops, in little dives you'd hardly notice from the outside. He said they were honest. He lived near McClanahan's in a blocky red brick apartment building on West 18th Street. His apartment was on the 6th floor, 3 blank-walled rooms I assumed at first he'd just moved into. There was so little in them. He'd been there for years, though, and there wasn't a picture in the place. A single knick-knack. He had no more furniture than was absolutely necessary, and each piece was spare. Purely functional, an unfinished pine bookcase, a futon couch with a plain back cover and no throw pillows, a rectangular wooden table with 4 folding chairs. There's a kind of spare you see in magazines that's studied and elegant, each thing an object, a strategically placed sculptural vase holding an arrangement of perfect white tulips. Kilroy's apartment wasn't like that. It was more as if he were camping there, poised to make a move. When I asked him why the place was so empty, he just laughed. The bedroom, the box spring on the floor, mattress on the box spring, while sheets on the mattress, white sheets on the mattress, white pillows on the sheets, and Kilroy standing in front of me, his fingers just finished with the buttons on my sweater. There'd been a kiss already, or more like 4 or 5 out walking that afternoon. In the elevator, just inside the front door of his apartment. Really, one long kiss interrupted by conversation, by the need to keep moving until we were here. We were here. He kissed me again and then traced a line from my throat to the top of my jeans and back up to the clasps of my bra. My breasts fell out and he opened his hand to span them. His thumb on one nipple and his little finger on the other. Tiny circles, and then he stroked down the undercurves. I tried closing my eyes, but his hands came up to my face, thumbs at my lashes, and I had to look again, had to see that it was he. Kilroy, eyes dark and gray, blue, black, banded, flecked with the color of the sky. His thin lips, the crease at the tip of his nose, his narrow hands and his long fingers on my shoulders now, pushing the sweater off, the bra straps. His lips were still cold from outside. Late September and windy like in Madison, but also different. A lower, more subversive wind, not your hair, but your body, the very center of you. It was touch, touch, slide open, and his tongue on my lower lip, sweeping from side to side. I had to yank to untuck his shirt, a stiff denim one shirt tail and then the other, and then the warmth underneath, the hair on his belly and chest, my fingertips plowing through it, raking up and down, around, down into the back of his jeans, tight, all the way down until each hand was full of buttock. My fingers just at the tops of his legs, finding the lines of sweat. He unbuttoned his own shirt, tossed it toward the dresser, held me skin to skin, his hands alive on my back, coming around under my arms, thumbs on my nipples, mouth, the bed coming up under me, zippers, jeans, and then suddenly the room, the apartment, the world, my face in my hands, and his hand on my face, his eyes on my eyes, asking, "Are you okay?" I was. I pulled the sheet aside. The we're doing this of it, sweeping the thing out of the way, and I closed my eyes and felt him hard against my leg, the satiny softness of it against my thigh, pushing to get in. And then it was this. Yes, familiar and strange, old and new, me and not me. The Dive from Clausen's Pier by Ann Packer. Turnpike Plaza, 365, Rec Squad.